Agni parthene despina achrande Theotoke Infrianim frefte parthene migdiranasa alendros
Hello and welcome to the Orthodox Logos. My name is Ian Silver, and today I'm joined with my co-host Nathaniel Harmon.
Greetings.
And we're going to be diving into the NPR hit piece on the ROCOR Church, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. And we're also going to talk about how Nancy Pelosi is not being allowed to receive communion in the Catholic Church. And I know some people...
Nothing too controversial then.
Yeah.
And this will just be very straight, cut and dry, straightforward.
Yep.
Super simple, not controversial at all.
And some people, I guess, had an issue with me referring to the Catholic communion as communion, and I agree, it's not, but also that wasn't the point of my post when I made the post. I think it was a very noble act for an archbishop to take, saying, you know what,
Right.
Until you renounce your ways of being a Satanist, being pro-abortion, you're not
Right.
allowed in the church to receive communion.
Well, it's about time that happens. I know that is an issue even within the Orthodox faith. There are some people who espouse views that are completely incompatible within Orthodoxy, and they are still allowed to commune. And that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But, we are going to try to speak about this with charity. I know the article that we're going to look at from NPR has caused a lot of waves. Abbot Trifon has made a video on it. We've seen a number of articles come out about it.
Which got deleted. Either he took it down, but with knowing how things have gone with him
Right.
speaking out against, the pandemic.
He's got a target on his back.
Yeah, because it was right away, it was gone. So who knows? I'm not going to say
But,
he...
but in either event, there's been a lot of backlash on this, and I would say that the people who are being cited in this article who attend Orthodox parishes and who are, at least according to rumor, still in Orthodox communion, they require prayers. Don't go, if you listen to this and feel the urge to go harass them on social media or talk a lot of trash about them behind their back or even talk trash to their face. Don't. That's not going to change their mind. They require prayer, and if they continue to do things that are attacking orthodoxy, then the clergy and the hierarchs will handle it. And don't do things out of a sense of vengeance. That is not what is required here. If that is what you're inclined to do, then probably just don't do anything. There's a quote from St. John Chrysostom that I reference fairly often on here, and that is that if you speak in anger, even if you are right, you are wrong, because by speaking through anger, you have allowed yourself to sin more grievously than the person you are attempting to correct. So bear that in mind. Like I said, there's going to be some unpleasant things we have to talk about here. Ian and I don't really endorse anything that is said in this NPR article, but that doesn't mean that we go after these people. That is a very un-Christian thing to do. It's a very unorthodox thing to do.
And it would only make them
right. It would
even
verify
more right.
their point in their eyes.
Not even more right, because everything that they say, I mean, we'll get into it, but we also are going to read a letter that a friend of ours wrote to a family member. Some things have been taken out of it to, kind of conceal his identity
Right.
and to not share personal information, but it's kind of addressing the situation from a person who's part of ROCOR to someone who listens to this type of news, as they like
Right.
to call it. And it might give some perspective on it, because me and Nathan are part of the Greek Orthodox Church, and while we have our own issues,
Right.
we don't get attacked because we're not far-right American converts, apparently.
We don't get attacked because people don't know about it yet. One of the things that we'll probably close this discussion with is a brief analysis of what we can learn from the Roman Catholics and what the current political attitude toward the Roman Catholics can tell us about what's coming down the pike for us as faithful Orthodox, or at least Orthodox who are attempting to be faithful. I won't say that I'm remotely successful in that.
Better way of putting it. So we were going to read the article, but we're going to listen to it so that way we can kind of interject with some thoughts.
Right.
And I will put the link for it in the description. Maybe what we can do is pull it up like that. Here we go. So at least you guys can kind of see what we're reading from. This is from the NPR. Well, this one's from the Hawaii Public Radio, but it was written by NPR by a woman that goes by the name of Odette Youssef. I'm not exactly sure on her background, but there's been some, I guess, some talk circulating. Abbot Trifon spoke about it, that she basically infiltrated the church with the intention to expose things or to make up lies about the church. Who knows if she is Orthodox?
Well, like we said from the get-go, pray for her. She requires prayers, much like all of us do. But if someone draws a target on the back of the church, then they especially need prayers.
Yeah, so we'll get into it, and hopefully the audio is sufficient for our discussion. So may God be with us, and we'll go ahead and dive into this. Nathan, anything else before we start?
Not off the top of my head.
I like their picture.
It is a nice photo.
Yeah. All right.
Let's go.
Or signal Russian plans to
I'm going to restart it because I think we briefly were listening to it.
mobilize for a larger conflict. In the end, Putin didn't do either.
Oh, here we go.
Though he
Give me
acknowledged Russian
one
deaths
moment.
in Ukraine, there were
Today in Russia,
we
a
go.
celebration 77 years old.
At 10 a.m., the gigantic parade starts. A masked Red Army band is first in line as Soviet Russia hails the dawn of victory.
In May of 1945, Russians celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany, something they still do each year on May 9th, Victory Day.
That is sound from Today. It's a military band in Moscow's Red Square where tanks and thousands of soldiers paraded. With Russia now occupying a very different position on the world stage than it did at the end of World War II.
Уважаемые граждане России,
In the third month of Russia's attack on Ukraine, international observers braced for what Russian President Vladimir Putin might say in his big speech. There was speculation Putin might use the day to celebrate victory in Ukraine or signal Russian plans to mobilize for a larger conflict. In the end, Putin didn't do either.
Though he acknowledged Russian deaths in Ukraine, there were no claims of victory and no signal of widening action. Instead, Putin, addressing Russian soldiers, committed to stay the course in Ukraine and tied Russian action there to its fight against fascism 77 years ago.
вы сражаетесь за Родину.
So that's actually true, as has been demonstrated on a number of occasions already by the widespread Ukrainian, at least by widespread use of the Azov Battalion, which is a legitimate Nazi unit. And lest anyone here think that Nazis are necessarily anti-Semitic, that's not true. Nazism is National Socialism and fascism, which is what these guys are. So, yeah, that is actually true.
Yep. And there's been photos of certain things circulating, which you can find on your own, of certain people with said.
Well, you can buy Azov Battalion T-shirts with a swastika on them.
Yeah.
Amazon was promoting them a while back.
Yeah. But censoring anything like the other day, I was trying to make a post and boost it or promote it, whatever you want to call it, and it wouldn't let me promote to Russia. Like I couldn't. I just do everywhere. I do like Arizona, Canada, Greece, and I did Russia, and it was like posts are no longer allowed to be promoted in Russia. And I screenshotted it, and yeah.
Wow, good times.
Pretty interesting.
Родину, за ее будущее, за то, чтобы никто не забыл уроков Второй мировой.
You are fighting for our motherland, he said, its future so that nobody forgets the lessons of World War II. He added, there is no place in today's world for Nazis. Putin has used false claims of Nazism in Ukraine to justify Russian attacks.
Вместо палачам, карателям и нацистам.
And while today's Victory Day celebration was smaller than in recent years, it's a holiday that's grown under Putin, who has used it to rally nationalist sentiment. Which brings us...
It's interesting how they're like calling out him as a nationalist when he's speaking against actual nationalists.
Well,
they're different types of nationalists, mind you.
What I would point out to people is that nationalism as it is used in the modern media doesn't mean what nationalism actually means. Or at least there's 2 or 3 interpretations that they'll use. So one of the things to realize is that nationalism generally refers to a insert whatever country you're in first policy, right? And thinking that your country is great, which is what the whole Donald Trump campaign was.
Yeah, America first, make America great again.
There is, however, a different kind of what you might call an ethnic, or you could call it an autochthonous nationalism, which is, only people of a particular ethnicity belong in this country or have a right to do anything in this country, etc.
Yeah,
or something along those lines. And interestingly, that is not the kind of nationalist that Putin is. His opponent that the media loved up until 15 minutes ago, Alexander Navalny, is the kind of nationalist who thinks that if you are not an ethnic Russian, you do not belong. No. The opponent that Putin was facing in an election fairly recently, Alex Navalny, he is actually an autochthonous nationalist. He thinks that anyone who is not ethnically Russian should be kicked out of Russia.
Yeah,
and he actually does hate Jews.
It's a little different.
Interesting, yeah.
Which brings us to a story about a surprising place where Russian nationalist sentiment is growing, right here in the U.S.
We're talking about Russian Orthodox parishes sprouting up in the South and Upper Midwest, in places with few direct links to Russia. These tiny congregations are mostly made up of American evangelicals and Catholics who've converted. But among them is a growing network of white nationalists, some of whom closely identify with Vladimir Putin. NPR's Odette Youssef has the story.
In the fall of 2017, anthropologist Sarah Riccardi-Swartz moved to a tiny Appalachian town in West Virginia. She was there to study a religious community known as the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, or ROCOR for short. And what she really wanted to understand was why this lesser-known faith tradition was appealing to American Christians who had absolutely no links to Russia.
It's typically an immigrant faith, so I was really interested in that experience and why it spoke to converts.
Riccardi-Swartz is a postdoctoral fellow at Arizona State University. Her book based on her research came out last month. What she found was a community of white American Christians who were disillusioned with change in the U.S. and who longed for the social and gender boundaries of the past.
They are anti-abortion, they're pro-heteronormative families, they're anti-trans.
They make that sound like it's a bad thing.
Okay, so here's the thing to consider, guys. And this is probably not news to anyone who's listening, but this sets the tone for the rest of the article. That is what she's describing as being extremist. And white supremacist and nationalist is someone who appeals to moral standards that have existed up until 45 seconds ago.
It's like, I mean, even besides being Orthodox, it's like, have you not read any scripture?
Well, it's not even a matter of scripture at this point. This has always been the Christian moral code and moral teaching.
Yeah, pre-Bible.
Yeah, since the dawn of the church.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, bear in mind that everything now that she says about, okay, yeah, this is white nationalist or extremist or alt-right or whatever, that's the benchmark that she's using to describe that. So when she's saying, yeah, these evangelicals are coming out because they don't want cultural homogeneity, because they want cultural homogeneity. They don't want there to be cultural pluralism. They're not talking about cultural pluralism like a Greek and a Russian, Greeks or Russians trying to figure out whose particular practice of prayer is better. They're talking about, is it okay for there to be, two men and a transgender woman or whatever raising 4 non-binary children? That's what they're talking about. That's going to be the comparison.
Well, I guess we're extremists.
That's not news to me.
Yeah, so pretty interesting. I love how they led with that. They're anti-abortion, anti-trans, and it's like...
That's not extreme. That's normal.
Yeah. What's extreme is teaching your little boy he can wear a dress. Lord have mercy.
Well, that wearing a dress makes him a girl.
Yeah.
Anti-trans. There's very distinct gender roles in the church and in the domestic sphere.
Riccardi-Swartz said these converts believed that in ROCOR, they had found a church that has remained the same regardless of place or politics, where tradition and hierarchy rule. But she also found that some of these converts weren't only searching for religious purity.
I really didn't see the racism up close until I talked to a man named Dean.
Dean is a pseudonym. Riccardi Swartz doesn't use real names in her published work in accordance with the ethics of her field.
And he said, I'm so...
Oh, yeah, because she's ethical.
Well, here's the problem. If you're going to level these kinds of complaints, but no one can actually find who your sources are,
Yeah.
that detracts from your credibility.
Well, we do. His name's Dean.
Well, the other issue I have as well is, again, this is another, it's actually a very clever rhetorical trick that she's pulling. This is also setting us up to look like for anyone who's not from the Southwest or hasn't paid close attention to what some strains of Mormonism do. Not too far north of us, there's a place called Colorado City, Arizona. And that is the site of one of the of this movie that's coming out on, or the show that's coming out on FX called Under the Banner of Heaven, based on a book written by John Krakauer. And that follows some of the legitimately extreme things that happen in the Mormon faith, where, they're actually engaging in polygamy to an absurd extent, to where one man might have 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 wives, right? And if you try to leave that, if they don't kill you outright, they're going to, malign and slander you and try to destroy your life in other ways. So she's setting the tone to make it sound like we're that kind of community, that if you talk bad about ROCOR or if you talk bad about Orthodoxy, we're going to slander you and never let you come back in again. That's not the case. If you have actually sinned, you might be excommunicated and might be required to undergo penance, but you're not going to be murdered or chased around and prevented from having any kind of stability in life. Yeah. That's not what happens.
So angry. And I said, well, why are you angry? And he said, I'm a white guy. I've been pushed to the margins in this diverse society. And he said, my whole neighborhood is changing. There's all of these gays and there's all of these different people, and you can't even get a job now as a white guy because you're oppressed.
Views like these aren't unheard of, but Riccardi Swartz was surprised by what Dean said next.
He also talked about how much he supported Vladimir Putin and Russia, and then he stopped and he sort of smiled and he said, you know what I have upstairs? And I said, no, what do you have upstairs? I've never been to your house before. And he said, I have a gun safe and I have lots of guns, and I know that there's a war coming and I want to be on the right side of that war. And I said, who is the war with? Who's the right side? And he said, Russia's the right side.
You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
When neo-Nazis and white nationalists rallied in Charlottesville almost 5 years ago, the language they used was new to many Americans. Since then, talk of a so-called Great Replacement and, quote, forced multiculturalism has bled into more mainstream rhetoric on the right. Some Orthodox...
That wasn't spread by the right. I'll state my views on this very briefly for anyone who has not heard me say this yet, but I am no supporter of democracy. Actually, I've been anti-democratic for many years, long before I was Orthodox. And one of the reasons is because I think that democracy opens the door to corruption and tyranny of the minority or whoever has the best rhetoric or can manipulate the most people. But what she's saying about Great Replacement theory being spread by the right, or white nationalism being spread by the right, or this whole notion of, white men being oppressed being something that the right made up. White men are the ones who are having to apply to jobs where when you walk in, and I have seen this has happened to me, where you apply and it says, we are looking for this particular ratio of employees. And if you happen, even if you're qualified, we will hire someone else over you if you're a white man.
Well, yeah,
that has happened. That's where I've seen that happen.
That's where the diversity, equity, and inclusion comes in.
Right.
And that happened to me where I just got let go of.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened? All right, you may have told me this story, but I don't recall it.
Yeah, so I was working at a medical manufacturing facility, which shall remain nameless unless you've watched other episodes. but there's a lot of people walking around. They're very pro-trans. There's people that are wearing big buttons that say, my pronouns are they, them, protect trans kids. And I was open about being Christian, but I wasn't like evangelizing or pushing it on anybody. People just knew I was a Christian, just like I knew the girl who wore the Santa Muerta, the Angel of Death necklace, or the kid who went by Thor because he saw a Marvel movie, or the they, them who was a girl but wanted attention. It was like all of this was okay, but
You having icons on your locker wasn't.
yeah. So this person that I noticed had, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, on her locker. So I was like, oh, I'm going to put some icons and pictures of my family on the locker. None of that seemed to be an issue. But as things progressed, I started to kind of feel some animosity towards me for just being who I was, not even preaching it. And I took off for Holy Week, excused. These were excused days that I took off. I didn't even take off. I went into work and left early.
Well, you took like an hour and a half or 2 hour break.
Yeah. And then I would text them and say, hey, I'm actually not coming back. They're like, totally fine. You already stated that in the email. So my email said I wasn't coming back. But when I had said, I might come back, we'll see. So long story short, I didn't come back to work. It was excused. Pascha was my birthday. And then so I took Monday off to celebrate my birthday because I didn't really celebrate my birthday on Pascha. Didn't feel right. So Monday I didn't go to work. Everything was fine. I went in Tuesday. Everything was fine. I worked an extra hour. Everybody sang me happy birthday, etc., etc. I'm wearing a shirt that says Make America Christian Again. The next morning, I get a phone call from not the employer, but the temp service who employs me with them as a contractor. And they said, don't bother going in. They don't want you back there. They don't want you working there. And it come to find out, it wasn't explicitly stated that this was the reason, but what happened was my leaders didn't let the other leaders know I had taken off with permission. It was basically an attack for me leaving for church and for me being a Christian. I found out without them saying it that that's what it was. And it's 100% obvious that's what it was, because they ended up basically saying, we'll hire him back in 6 months. And I'm trying to navigate whether or not it's going to be. So it's like this whole notion of, we love everybody, be diverse and
except you people,
be inclusive, except you people. And by you people, they mean a
Christian,
white
specifically
Christian,
if you're a white Christian,
a white
that's the
Christian
worst
male.
thing you can be.
So I'm not saying woe is me or feel bad for me, but it was just such an example of the world we're living in where I'm okay. I mean, spiritually, and I'm pretty much okay with working around whoever. Yeah, it sucks. And I would talk about it to Nate or say, I got to pray for this person. This came up today, but I don't care. I don't care that there's other people working there. I understand that. But as soon as they find out the truth about me,
right.
And I think I had maybe not like voiced my opinion on what I think of the Russian, but someone was like, "Oh, are you Russian Orthodox?" I was like, "No, I'm Greek Orthodox, but I support Russia. I'm praying for Russia. I'm praying for Ukraine. I have friends who are Russian Orthodox," and they were kind of like, "Oh, so you like Putin?" And I was like, "This isn't a conversation we need to have at work."
Right.
So, yeah, rant over, but basically, it's a real thing being targeted for being white. That doesn't give you the right to be hateful towards other people, and there's no room for that in the Orthodox Church, as I'm sure we'll get into here.
We'll definitely get into it. But the other issue I'm having with what this lady is saying is this whole notion of, I don't doubt there's someone who might have said something along the lines of, yeah, I've got weapons and or firearms and ammo because war is coming and I want to be on Russia's side. Although even if her relating of that conversation was accurate, that's not quite what he said. But either way, this whole notion of apocalypticism has always existed in Orthodoxy. Now, it's not chiliastic, and it sounds to me like that guy is thinking in a chiliastic kind of fashion, and that is a heresy, right? If he's thinking that, somehow Russia is going to be the political entity that ushers in a Christian era of peace and, wonderful economic and social stability, that's chiliasm. That's a variant of chiliasm anyway. So that wouldn't be accurate, but that's a result of not understanding his catechism, not a result of him being a white nationalist.
Yeah. Not understanding what the church actually stands for.
Right. So, and I mean, I'm not going to lie. I don't even believe that she had that conversation. Like I said, she's this woman, what was her name?
Odette Youssef.
No, Riccardi Swartz.
Oh yeah.
She's been known to go around and take people and, and talk to people in various Orthodox churches and misconstrue what they're saying. So
who knows?
Yeah. Who knows if that's actually even true?
Some Orthodox converts were among those stoking those fears from the beginning. Perhaps the most notorious was Matthew Heimbach. He had established the neo-Nazi Traditionalist Worker Party, which helped organize the rally in Charlottesville. Years before that deadly rally, he had been excommunicated from a non-Russian Orthodox church after clergy became aware of his, quote, nationalist segregationist views. But Orthodoxy is decentralized. There are nearly 24 branches, including Greek, Russian, Coptic, Antiochian, and more. When Heimbach was booted from one...
Okay, I've said many times on this podcast that I've got a general rule, and that is if someone can't even get the basics right, why would I trust their in-depth analysis?
Yeah.
Right? ROCOR and the Copts are not in communion.
The Greeks and the
Copts are not in communion.
The Greeks and the Russians.
The Greeks and the Ethiopians. Well, no, I'm not even talking about that particular schism. I'm talking about these churches that haven't been in communion for for over 1,000 years, right? We haven't been in communion with the Ethiopians in well over 1,000 years, right? We haven't been in communion with the Copts in over 1,000 years. We haven't been in communion with who else was it that she mentioned?
She didn't say Assyrians, but I mean, there's other.
Yeah, so she can't even get that right. So why on earth would I believe anything else that she says? That's a really simple thing to square away. I knew that before I was Orthodox, that the Copts and the Orthodox were different, right? So she's a scholar, and she makes a mistake that simple, that early on. Her ability to parse data well is extremely suspect now, as is her ability to reason through what she hears.
Yeah, and she also wrote a book, which we'll get to. Maybe I'll pick it up just to see what that's full of.
From one, he joined another. Those who track the rise of extremism in Orthodoxy say it's particularly acute in ROCOR, the Russian church, but other branches of the church haven't been immune. Inga Leonova is founder of The Wheel, a journal on orthodoxy and culture. She says as soon as she started writing about this, the floodgates opened.
There are people who are studying this stuff, and so they've been coming out of the woodwork and supplying me with a lot of information.
Those who study the influx of extremists to Orthodoxy say in terms of numbers, it's small. Orthodox Christians are less than 0.5% of the U.S. population, and within Orthodoxy, these elements are considered fringe. But they also warn that it would be dangerous to ignore.
That was just like a stupid point. It's not orthodoxy.
Well, but here's the other point. She has drawn a line from people who joined ROCOR because they were seeing their evangelical mainline Protestant denominations liberalize. And by that I mean having women as preachers, or having women as the head of as the head of congregations, rather, because that's what a preacher is in a Protestant milieu. Being anti-abortion, thinking that the alphabet soup Nazi agenda is bad, right? She's drawn a line from that to just converts, to some random dude who got excommunicated from Orthodoxy and allegedly came back in, but I mean, she never says where or who allowed him in, so that's suspect, to saying, okay, well, now I've got people reaching out to me saying this is bad and dangerous and these people are extremists. So it's very clever rhetorically what she's doing, but she's lying.
Yeah, another thing is, like, of course there's people in all aspects of life that have racist views or certain ideologies that are completely toxic and anti-orthodox. But that is not the majority of people, and hopefully the people that do come into the church, especially the Russian church, will eventually have their heart softened and realize that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. Yes, there's certain things that the Orthodox Church and the Church Fathers have taught us, such as the issues we're talking about with abortion or same-sex relationships. That doesn't make you an extremist or a nationalist. You can hold those views as an Orthodox Christian and separate that from what I guess you could call your political affiliation.
Right.
It doesn't make you a racist just because you're anti-abortion or it's like it doesn't work that way.
Well, and here's another thing to consider as well. A lot of people who intentionally join ROCOR, who seek ROCOR out specifically, are people who are familiar with Russian history, people who are familiar with, say, writers like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, or, we'll stick with Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
Right? So they're familiar with what democracy has led to, because if you know nothing about the history of Russia, democracy in Russia prior to the Bolshevik Revolution lasted about 45 minutes.
Yeah, the suffering that the Russians have gone through for the last
because of democracy.
How many years is that?
1917 to 1991, so
70-ish years.
74 years.
Yeah, the things that they suffered
because of Western pushes to democracy were really, really, really bad. They lost a staggering number of people, and they suffered tremendously because of these kinds of things. And even Solzhenitsyn, having grown up under Soviet rule, gone to the gulags, and then been exiled from Russia because of his political views, came to the U.S. and said, I cannot recommend your way of life as a replacement for what my people are going through now because you are all men without chests, to paraphrase.
Yeah, and
you have no sense of morality. You have no sense of virtue. You don't know what it is to be a good man or a good woman.
Yeah. And
so
if you guys want to hear some of that, we did a 2-part series, I believe, on Solzhenitsyn's Harvard commencement speech, and they were expecting him to praise the
he did
US.
Not. He never got a major speaking. He never got a big speaking or offer again.
Yeah, so he shows up. Everybody's happy and clapping. He then opens his mouth, and people are booing and throwing things. So it's like he wasn't here to praise us. He was here to give us a warning of this is where you're headed.
Right.
So Russia is fighting, like they said, but they tried to make it sound bad. Putin and Russia, in general, is fighting for the motherland, fighting to hold together things that they had almost lost due to the Bolshevik Revolution and the new atheists and people destroying icons and tearing down churches and pushing the agenda, which we see nowadays. So they're fighting for something that matters. The horrible thing is that
you can disagree about how it's happening.
Exactly.
I have no issue with people who do that.
And I disagree that it's happening because Orthodox Christians are killing each other.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing because that's the case. But all this to say, what this author is doing is giving brief excerpts about what a particular person or group of people may or may not think, labeling it as ultra right wing or white nationalism or neo-Nazis or extremist, and then she's drawing a connecting line from that thing to something that's completely unrelated, and then drawing another line back to something that's normal, but using that same extremist packaging.
Exactly.
So that you can't actually tell where these topics fall on the spectrum of good or bad.
Yeah, she talks about the Charlotte incident, but then she basically says the same people who are anti-abortion are the same people who are running people over with cars.
Well, the same person. Lest we forget it was one person who did that. But let's continue listening to this madness.
To ignore. They note that these few extremists are networking with outside groups and producing online media that evangelize hate in the name of orthodoxy. Their podcasts and internet shows revolve around anti-Semitism, contempt for women's and LGBTQ rights, xenophobia, and full-throated support of white nationalists, including some who've been convicted of violence.
How can you be xenophobic if you're acquiring an immigrant faith?
Yeah.
As this
she
individual
stated.
calls it. That doesn't work. I have never met an Orthodox who is quote-unquote xenophobic. I have talked to and met Orthodox people who think that, say, controls on a border are a good thing because if you're going to have a country, you have to have borders.
Yeah.
But that's a different question. That's not xenophobia.
Also, I'm sure there is. I've seen pages where there's people promoting things in the guise of orthodoxy, and it's not. So have discernment on who you listen to. If you feel we are one of those people, have discernment. Don't listen to us. I'm telling you right now, there's people. The online Orthodox community is volatile. I've fallen into the trap before. I've gotten out of the trap. I'm trying my very, very best to stay away from it. We both are. Our point is to not not engage in that type of stuff. But it's there. It's everywhere. Right. Stay away from it. Have discernment. If it's not patristic, if it's not teaching about love and humility and from stuff that the church fathers has talked about, it's not orthodoxy. It's if they're spewing just madness and hate, it might be something to stay away from. Right. It's not going to do anything good for your spiritual life or theirs. So pray for them.
And here's another thing to consider as well. And this is probably going to be a very controversial thing coming from me because, that's what I do. I tell stories and I'm just controversial. But what she's calling anti-Semitism is probably not what we generally think of as anti-Semitic. Like when someone says anti-Semitism in the 21st century, generally what one thinks of is something like the what's a good example? Like the lead up to the Holocaust or the Dreyfus affair that happened in the late 19th century in France, right? These are the kinds of things people tend to think of. However, in Orthodoxy, if you encounter anti-Semitism, probably what you're encountering is actually someone saying something to the effect of, there is no such thing as Judeo-Christian values, because Jewish ethics and ethical teachings after the resurrection of Christ,
they do not align with Christian values.
Diverged. They're not the same thing, right? Now, they share a lot in common, but they're not the same. They're not the same thing at all. So it's probably something like that, or somebody observing that, there were a lot of Jews involved in the Bolshevik Revolution, and that was a terrible thing, and that was really bad, because there were a lot of Jews engaged in the Bolshevik Revolution, because, in all fairness to them, the Jews had suffered in ways that were disagreeable under the Tsarist regimes, which we can talk about that some other time. So it makes sense. But you're probably encountering something like that, not someone saying Jews need to be rounded up and shot, because I have never come across an Orthodox who said that.
No.
I have never come across, honestly, I can't ever remember hearing somebody say that, period.
And whether or not we agree with
the exception of some Muslims that I've met.
Yeah, whether or not we agree with what Jewish people are doing nowadays, lest us forget, we pray for them.
Right.
It's something that I don't think they're mentioning. Like in the liturgy, these people, and the monastics specifically, pray for the whole world.
Right.
Why are we not hearing anything about how they pray for everybody?
She is approaching this very much like a Protestant, saying, "Oh, look, one Orthodox guy or two Orthodox guys or 10 Orthodox guys
has
said this."
Has a racist meme page.
It's like, okay, sweet. Have you actually tried to learn or apply the Orthodox teaching to this to say, yeah, that's not good, if that's even happening?
Yeah. Go to a full liturgical cycle, and I guarantee you, don't quote me on this, but the person who you're seeing that is very extreme or has these views, see if they end up changing or even staying in the church after a whole year. If they can still hold those views of hatred after a year, because I'll tell you right now, prior to me coming into the church, I had certain views which I will not discuss, and I have since let those go because the church has shown me compassion, and it's taught me a lot.
This is kind of a tertiary thing, but have I ever told you the story of the most racist thing I have ever heard in my life?
I believe so.
Would you like to hear it again?
Yes.
So,
am I going to regret this?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So it was, when I used to work night shift, there was a bar I would go to in the mornings to get either a coffee and a whiskey or a couple of beers or whatever, and do a little bit of work before I would go home and go to sleep. Now, because it was a bar/coffee shop in the mornings, there'd be a bunch of tourists or random people coming in the morning to have their coffee, and I'd be sitting there having a whiskey or whatever, right? So I'm sitting there one morning either reading or writing something, I don't remember what, and this black guy comes in. And in Flagstaff at this point in time, this was several years ago, there weren't a lot of black guys in Flag. Like, I knew most of the ones that were there that lived here who weren't students, because there was like 7 or 8 black guys that lived here. Whatever. So this guy comes in, I don't recognize him. I'm like, oh, wonder who he is or where he's from. And he comes, sits down next to him, and we start talking. And he tells me he's from New Jersey. And I'm like, what the heck are you doing in Flag, dude? You're a long way from New Jersey. And it's not exactly a straight shot drive. Like, what's going on? And he proceeds to tell me that he's dating a Native American gal, a Navajo gal. And was like, oh yeah, that's cool. It's like, yeah, that this is where they tend to live, so yeah, that makes sense. And then he proceeds to tell me in this weird kind of conspiratorial way, yeah, but I don't know if I'm going to marry her or have kids with her. And it's like, okay, well, that's weird because I didn't ask you anything about that. That was a way out of left field comment. Like, why would you tell me that? So I asked him, well, okay, why? Which I shouldn't have asked because I regretted it. But he then leans in and says, well, I just don't want to pollute my genes with her. I was like, okay. And I paid my tab and got up and left. I was like, seriously, man? Like, if you're sleeping with a gal, you lose the right to whine about polluting your genetics.
Yeah.
For anyone who's not watching this, that's a scare quoted comment because that's not a thing. But that is the most racist thing I've ever heard someone say in my life, because people say, oh, well, jokes are racist. And it's like, yeah, well, jokes are jokes.
Yeah.
This guy is actively trying not to have children with someone that he's sleeping with because he thinks his genes are superior to hers. It's like, because he thinks the genes of his race, which I also dispute as being even a thing, are superior to hers.
Yeah.
It's like
sketch.
Yeah. I'm like, what the heck, man?
You're like, all right, well.
It's like, I don't want to talk or drink anymore. I want to go home and wish that I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. That's a weird one.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
You're like, I just finished a 12-hour shift.
Like, can we talk about something that's not sketchy?
Well, that is another one of Nate's stories.
I have some crazy ones.
# Nate's stories.
Been convicted of violent hate crimes. More recently, some have used their channels to amplify pro-Putin propaganda.
Here's the deal also, Russia is a Christian nationalist nation, actually Orthodox Christian and Russian Orthodox. So
the day before Russia invaded Ukraine, a clip from a far-right talk show on the web made the rounds on social media. It featured a woman named Lauren Witzke, who was the 2020 GOP candidate for Senate from Delaware. Witzke is also in the process of converting to Russian Orthodoxy.
I identify more with with Putin's Christian values than I do with Joe Biden.
Witzke declined to speak with NPR for this story.
Yeah, me too.
I wonder why. So, here's the thing. Given what we talked about with nationalism earlier, Russia is nationalistic, right? That doesn't mean that it does not, that it believes in pure cultural homogeneity, right? Because that doesn't exist in Russia. It doesn't really exist anywhere in the world. But, well, to some extent. But what Witzke said is not wrong, right? Now, I'm not going to be someone who says Putin is definitely a Christian or Putin is not a Christian. I'm not going to make either claim. What I can say is I see him practicing orthodoxy the way it ought to be practiced for the most part, right? I don't know if that means that his personal life is in line with what that entails, but I can't argue with what I see, right?
Yeah.
And I will say that based on what Biden does and what Biden says, that even though he claims to be a Catholic, he is certainly no Catholic. Now, I sincerely hope that I am wrong in that assessment, but someone who supports all manner of depravity, including abortion, including rampant promiscuity and sexual mutilation of children, that is not a Catholic thing. It never has been.
Yeah.
So if he's supporting that, he's not a Catholic. That's just the way it is. And if Putin is supporting the things that belong with orthodoxy, such as he is trying to diminish abortion, he is not allowing rampant homosexuality to take root in Russia, he is not allowing Islam to take root in Russia, various other things like this, that is an orthodox thing to do, right? Now, for anyone who's going to misconstrue what I'm saying, I don't mean that he is purging Muslims. He's just not according them the benefits that orthodoxy has, which is good, which ought to be the case.
Yeah, go read the Quran.
It's hard to read in English. It's very boring.
But, yeah.
For this story. A loyal MAGA supporter, she aligns with the white nationalist America First movement and ran on an anti-immigration platform. At one point, she seemed to support QAnon.
Illegal immigration. I'm sick of this someone who crosses the border in the middle of the night and enters the United States or any other country illegally is just an immigrant. They are an illegal immigrant. That is not saying that they are not people, for anyone who happens to listen to this who is very bad at understanding the definitions of terms. It just means they broke the law when they entered this country, or
like
any other country that they entered illegally.
Like I love the bumper sticker that says "No human is illegal,"
except for children, because that's probably what that person believes.
Yeah, but it's like, what do you mean no human is illegal? I get what they're trying to say, but it's like,
well, it's bad rhetoric. Like it's not even good rhetoric. There,
Yeah.
there are underhanded rhetorical tricks that are at least impressive. That one's just childish.
And my mother, I'm a first generation American. My mother is an immigrant, and other things have happened to me that align with some of the other stuff we're talking about. We won't go into that, but she came here legally. She did what she had to do to become a legal citizen, and she still has to do what she has to do to maintain legal citizenship. And yes, it's a pain in the butt. It's expensive, but it's just the way things are, and it keeps us a little bit safer. And it's not to say that, remember, like the whole thing they misconstrued with like, oh, Mexicans are rapists and murderers. Like everybody that comes here is a rapist and a murderer. No, but some of them are. And it's not even Mexicans. It's anybody who comes here illegally. There's probably a reason they're coming here illegally.
And for anyone who says, well, Nathan, you're just a white man and a native-born American, so you can't talk about that. I, unlike a lot of people who are native-born Americans, have actually been an illegal immigrant in another country. It wasn't intentional, but I'll have to tell that story on Patreon or something else.
Yeah.
So I actually have more bona fides to talk about this than some of the people cited here.
So, yeah, not all humans are legal, because this guy definitely wasn't for a while.
Yeah. Like I said, it was not something that was done intentionally. It was actually a screw-up on the accepting country's logistical end of things, but still.
But it could have landed you in some trouble.
Yeah, it definitely could have, and almost did.
So we'll have to touch on that at some point.
It's a funny story.
On conspiracies, but has since renounced it. Aram Sarkisian says this pro-Putin stance is common among far-right converts to orthodoxy.
They see in him an Orthodox leader who stands for their perspectives on these culture wars issues, who speaks in the same blustery language that they look for in a strong leader.
Sarkisian is a postdoctoral fellow who studies the history of Eastern Orthodox Christians in the U.S. at Northwestern University. He says Kremlin propaganda has styled Putin as a pious defender of orthodoxy and traditional values. This has appealed to Christian fundamentalists in the U.S. Putin has also positioned himself as a foil to pluralist democracies of the West. That has appealed to America's white nationalists. Now with the war...
Again, that touches on what we talked about with Solzhenitsyn, right? What people tend to forget is that Putin and a lot of these politicians in Russia right now, and a lot of the cultural leaders in Russia right now, are heavily influenced by Solzhenitsyn. So pluralistic democracies are not a necessary good. And also, lest we forget, democracies, and this is citing a Jordan Peterson lecture, at least generally speaking. I'm going to generally speak on it. I'll probably mess some of it up, but Peterson brought up a really interesting point a couple of years ago, and that is democracies haven't existed long enough for us to even know if they actually work, which is true. The U.S., I mean, if we're actually going to be, how shall I say this, intentional about the way we study just American democracy, America's been through a number of political revolutions over the years, right? Lincoln was one. There were, I would say, maybe one or two prior to him, actually, but Lincoln was definitely one major paradigm shift in the way that American governance functions that turned away from what American democracy or republicanism actually was intended to look like. After that, I would say you have Woodrow Wilson / FDR kind of doing the same thing. Then after that, you have Lyndon Johnson doing the same thing. And then we have Obama doing the same thing, right? So who's to say that democracy works? Like, our country hasn't even functioned under the same metrics for any amount of time.
Yeah.
Worth considering. And lest we forget, democracy in Athens, because everybody goes, yes, but Athenian democracy, that lasted less than a century. And, the French Revolution lasted 10 minutes. The the quote unquote democracy in Germany after World War I lasted for about 10 years. Democracy in France has been a very tumultuous thing. Democracy in China turned into fascism in Taiwan. These things don't really work.
Yeah, it's just something that people in the West don't really understand yet. I mean, some do, but
right.
hopefully soon people will start to realize that.
Yeah, you're an optimist.
Let's see, 2 more minutes. Let's see if we can get through 2 minutes.
Now, with the war, Putin has received religious cover from the head of the church. The Patriarch in Moscow claimed the invasion of Ukraine is necessary to protect Orthodox Ukrainians from Western influence, namely gay pride parades. In the U.S., some lifelong ROCOR adherents have left their churches because of this.
Somebody just said we should stand and pray for both sides. Well, were the Brits supposed to pray for Hitler and Churchill at the same time?
Yes.
If you're an Orthodox Christian, yes.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, yes.
Yeah, you're definitely supposed to do that. That doesn't mean that you pray for Hitler's victory.
You ask God to have mercy on him.
Right.
On all sides, on the world.
And also, lest we forget what gay pride parades have got us.
I mean, it's also in the name, being prideful of something that is...
Well, no. Gay pride parades have been a thing for a number of years, right? After they started in the U.S., what, like 30 some odd years ago, 40 years ago? Now we're chopping children's genitals off and telling 4-year-olds they can be whatever gender they want. So is that really something that ought to be just accepted as an okay thing? Unequivocally, no.
Yeah.
Those movements are bad. They lead to cultural and societal degradation in an unprecedented fashion. Of course they should be opposed.
Yeah.
And Churchill at the same time?
Liana Zazulin grew up in a ROCOR community in Long Island. She's bewildered by the admiration these new converts hold for Putin and by the draw that her beloved church holds for white nationalists. But Zazulin says she's seen a growing tolerance for racism in the church.
Suddenly you would turn around and go, I don't recognize this.
4 decades ago, when she married her African-American husband, they were welcomed. But as the church expanded into new areas of the U.S., their kids experienced racism. Those shifting attitudes may have signaled to white nationalists that this church would be a place where they would be tolerated.
Seriously? Nothing to back that up.
Yeah.
I expect something to back that up. I have never heard any commentary on quote-unquote interracial marriages. We actually have an interracial couple at our parish.
Yeah, me.
No one, well, you and Brendania?
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure. They're not married yet, I don't believe, but...
I didn't know if they were together, but yeah.
I think they're together, yeah.
Yeah.
No one cares. And arguably that's in Arizona, so you could say, oh, well, no one would care because Arizona is not part of the quote-unquote Southern cause, which is another term that the author uses here. And there is no ROCOR support for the Southern cause because the Southern cause is not a thing anymore.
Yeah, we drink from the same cup, people.
Right. So I don't doubt that people might have made some kind of snarky comments, but again, I want to see the proof. I do not believe someone who has gone around looking for this in Orthodoxy, because they're going to take anything that they can out of context, generally speaking. These kinds of scholars don't know anything.
Yeah, also, I mean, a 10-minute article to prove...
That proves nothing?
Well, to try and prove that the ROCOR Church is racist, or drawing in far-right American converts, which, like I said, there's probably a few. But they will soon learn, God willing, that if that's the views that they hold, which is to hate other people for the color of their skin, Orthodoxy is not going to work for you, bud. You're going to have to become a Muslim.
Right.
Because, it's a little bit different then. They have a actual hatred towards white people or certain types of people
who aren't Muslim.
Yeah. We may not be accepting of certain people's views, but we still love everybody. Well, it's in our commandments.
Let's say a black Hebrew Israelite showed up to an Orthodox parish and tried to maintain the racial views that particular movement has after becoming Orthodox. That's not okay.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that someone who shows up espousing this kind of neo-Darwinian racial theory, if they were to show up and try to be part of the church, that wouldn't be agreeable either until they abandoned those ideas.
Yeah. All right, we'll finish this up, and Nathan, I was going to say to you, I know we wanted to do the Pelosi communion thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should save it for tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good.
I think we could tie that in and maybe make that a Patreon. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But I think because we're going to read the letter from our friend, that'll put us at a good time. And then tomorrow, it'll be out in a few days if we decide to do Patreon only. But we're going to talk about Nancy Pelosi being banned from communion in the Catholic Church. You've probably already seen the post I made on Instagram, and it was not to stir the pot at all. But such is the internet. As we can see here.
Right.
Inga Leonova uses the word infiltration when she talks about this, and she feels bishops across Orthodoxy are intentionally looking the other way. She says it's frustrating, but still, she chooses to remain Orthodox.
It's a treasure that I cherish, that has formed me, that has formed, paradoxically, maybe for some people, my views on the value of each human person.
Whether black, white, Asian, female, gay, or transgender, Leonova says this is what she understands Orthodoxy to be. Odette Youssef, NPR News.
Okay, then she's been badly catechized.
Wow, I didn't hear that last time.
Yeah, and what I mean when I say she's been badly catechized is there is no place for someone who is... How should I say this? There are places for people who recognize that the Orthodoxy is a place for people who know that they are spiritually afflicted, right?
As we all are.
As every single person is. If you are afflicted by transgenderism and refuse to oppose it, you're not going to be receiving communion in the Orthodox faith. Yeah. You're going to struggle with it, then by all means, jump on in. Please be with us.
Yeah.
But if you're going to show up and expect, and this goes for any kind of sin, right? I'm not singling out anyone in particular, although, well, I kind of am. If you struggle with, if you are an alcoholic and you become Orthodox and you do not struggle against that alcoholism at all, why are you Orthodox? Right? You have to struggle against your sin to be Orthodox. If you're not doing that, what's the point? You don't get to come in and demand an exception for your sin because it's yours.
Yeah, that's and I had someone reach out, and you know who you are, and we're gonna talk soon. I had someone reach out to me about some sins that they're struggling with, and sent a letter of appreciation saying, I struggle with these sins. I'm trying not to. I want to be Orthodox, or I'm becoming Orthodox, and I've realized that these sins are eating me up.
Right.
I still live with it in me, but I choose to fight it, and that's what Nathan's saying. And I won't go into exactly what it is, but this person is struggling, as an Orthodox Christian does, to deny the passions, and certain passions are worse than others for some people. Right. If you're a gay woman or a gay man, it doesn't mean we don't welcome you into the church. We do not accept certain things about that. Like if it's just like me and Nathan, we both have things that we struggle with. We try not to. And if you're struggling with it and you're acting on it, then
that's different than just accepting it.
Exactly. Like, oh, I'm gay. I like having relations with men, and I'm Orthodox, and I'm still going to the bar on Fridays and having relations with same-sex people.
Right, and I'm not even trying to not do that.
And it's the same thing with me. Like, I struggle with this and that, and I'm still struggling with this and that, and I'm still doing it, which is the case, but we go to confession, we have repentance, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like if you're gay, you're not allowed into the church, but you have to recognize that being proud of it, which is the whole thing with gay pride. It's like, I'm proud of doing something. It is literally in the name.
Right.
It's just so weird.
The queen of the vices cannot be something that you submit to and then expect also to be able to submit to the church. You get to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
It's like,
and we all struggle
with the sin of anger, right? If you worship at the feet of Ares, you don't get to then come taste the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
And not because Christ doesn't want you, but because you owe your allegiance to another God.
Yeah.
And you haven't surrendered that. You have not abandoned that allegiance.
And let us not forget, none of us are worthy to approach the chalice. Me and Nathan aren't saying that we're more worthy than someone who has these X, Y, and Z sins. But like I said, being proud of your sins is not something. I'm reading the book of Romans right now, and there's a lot of talk about, the wages
of sin,
death.
Right. Any sin.
Yeah. And God's grace is abundant, but does that mean we keep sinning just because we know God's grace is abundant? No, it doesn't. That doesn't negate it. There's no sin that overcomes God's grace.
Right. The thing I would point out to, going back to the article for a moment, is that what is happening in this...
Once again, not clergy. Sorry.
Right.
Let's put that out there again.
Yeah. The issue with what this woman is writing in this article is, and let's presume for a moment that every conversation and story that she relates in there is accurate. Not in the sense that it was just told to her by someone, but that the person who told her the story was telling the truth about what occurred, right? That accounts for some people who are behaving in an unorthodox fashion. That does not mean that the church is polluted. If you wish to know what something is supposed to be, you look and see what you look and see what the standard is to which it calls people. You don't look at the failures or the people who are struggling at the bottom of the ladder, right? You look at the ones who have succeeded and what they would have to say about these things. And interestingly, one of the things that the saints of our church and what Christ himself would say is, yes, if you're a sinner, follow the example of the prodigal son. Come back to me. I will welcome you with open arms, but you have to turn away from the foreign country. You have to turn away from the slop the pigs eat and come back.
Yeah.
That means you have to cut yourself off from a number of vile things, right? And this woman, I think, is intentionally cutting that out because whether she knows it or not, and this kind of goes into, and this is actually a good way to lead into the article the letter that our friend wrote. What we've seen over the last couple of years happen to the Roman Catholic Church is what is going to be in store for us as Orthodox here soon. The Optina elders before 1917, before the Bolshevik Revolution, prophesied that the madness that had begun in Russia would end in America. And we're beginning to see that. If whether or not you like Rod Dreher, look at his work. He interviewed a number of people who saw the rise of communism in Europe, and they all agree that what's happening in the U.S. looks exactly like the precursor to a totalitarian regime rising in the United States.
Yeah. He's wrote Live Not by Lies, the Benedict option.
Right.
The
Benedict option.
Yeah.
And like I said, you don't have to like Rod Dreher's politics to realize that
because he would consider himself a conservative.
Yeah. I mean, I would, yeah. But this
But
woman,
he makes valid points.
Right. This woman who wrote this article is firing the opening salvos of what is going to turn into, at the very least, a great disparaging attitude that is going to be leveled at the Orthodox soon. At least that's what I suspect, because that's how these kinds of things always start. It's always the authoritarian left who says things like, oh, well, if you don't have power, you can be vicious in your rhetoric and you can say all kinds of nasty things and slander people, and it's okay because they have power. Well, the Orthodox Church has never had political power in the U.S. So this is really kicking the church, well, it's still in its infancy in the United States. And abuse like that doesn't just stop. And honestly, if we're not receiving some sort of aggression from the godless of this world, are we even doing the work of Christ?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was long overdue to read an article like this. It's not the attention. It's not the attention we want as Orthodox Christians, but it's Christ said, "They hated me; they're going to hate you too."
Well, and it's proven to be the case, no matter where orthodoxy is, that when it is called to attention in a negative way, it always proves to be worse for the people who called the attention to it.
Yeah.
And the church always rises victorious. So
this is a letter a good friend of ours wrote to a family member, and we've been asked to keep names private, so we'll say his name is Dean, just like she did. But he sent it to us today, sent it to Nathan a few days back. So it goes like this. Hello, hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out because I read the article in NPR on ROCOR, which is the diocese I belong to. If you ever want to discuss it, I would be available. A lot of evil things are being said about this church. The article seems to suggest that you should be afraid of it and hate it because it's being used for political ends by some. It also presents a completely one-sided picture. For example, my own priest has condemned the war in Ukraine, and that has been par for the course in all the ROCOR churches in Arizona that I have heard of. Patriarch Kirill himself has asked us each to pray nightly for the end of the war. We pray out loud every liturgy for peace there as well. At least 2 members of the parish here that I attend have family in Ukraine. When I speak about the war with members of my parish, the feeling is often of sorrow and betrayal. It is a war between brethren. This is far from the picture being painted in the media right now. The love that I have found in this church has almost single-handedly allowed me to rediscover the peace and love and vibrance that I had been cut off from in early childhood due to the harshness of the world. I had cut myself off almost completely from people for years before coming to the church. Now I feel comfortable with people again and have friends who I love in Phoenix and Flagstaff. The tendency, I've seen through firsthand experience is that people who come in with intense political leanings drop them over time as they experience the love and healing they find in the church and begin to see that as more important. This church specifically helped me through the darkest period of my life, to come out the other side healed and full of joy and peace and valid hope. Please note that this article does not present a full and honest picture of what can be found at a ROCOR parish. And then he mentions, if you'd like to talk, I'm here. Hope you are well.
Right. And our friend brings up a really interesting point, and that as well is that the church has a healing effect over time. It's interesting to me that one of the things that the lady who wrote the NPR article cited was, oh, look, here's a couple of brand newly illumined converts or a couple of catechumens, and look how perverse they are. And it's like, okay, a catechumen isn't even a full member of the church yet. Seriously?
Yeah.
That's who you're going to cite as the authority on what's going on in the church? Really?
Yeah. Why don't you, they're saying that the bishops are looking the other way, but
Has she spoken to a bishop?
I also say, if she has, I would say that most of them don't want to talk to you because you work for NPR.
Right. One of the things she talks about in the article is that she reached out to Jordanville Seminary, and Jordanville didn't want to talk to her, and I cannot blame them because, like I said, one of the gals that she cites, Riccardi something or other.
Yeah.
I forget what the gal's name is. She's been known for a long time in Orthodox circles to go around and try to become friends with people to get them to say things and then take what they said out of context and slander them. So if you cite her as an authority and then say, hey, Jordanville Seminary, what do you think about X, Y, or Z thing? Or, hey, parish X, Y, or Z. Or, hey, hierarch X, Y, or Z. What do you think about this? Why on earth would they talk to you?
Yeah.
You've demonstrated yourself to be more than willing to trust a malicious slanderer over people who actually understand what's going on in the Orthodox Church. So why would they want to talk to you?
And I went to a Russian Orthodox Church here a few months back with our friend, and one of the first things they did was pray for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And pray for Russia. It was like they're not taking sides, they want the war to stop.
Well, and the other thing to take into account as well is, and our friend is right to point out, and I had forgotten about this, that the lady who wrote this article said, oh, well, Patriarch Kirill has said the war in Ukraine is a good thing. And to be honest, that's not actually what he said. He was talking about it being a necessary thing, but he didn't say it was good. He has, in fact, said on multiple occasions to pray for a swift resolution to the conflict and that it would be over as quickly and as bloodlessly as possible. But for all these people who hate Ukraine or hate the Orthodox Church so much because, our hierarchs are engaged in politics, well, guess what? The Patriarch of the Russian Church is not a political leader. He doesn't have the ability to steer the ship of state. So, separation of church and state, guys.
Yeah.
Which I think is a bad thing, but that's just me.
Well,
apologies for my sarcasm. This really gets my goat.
Yeah, it's a rough subject because we have people that that we're very close to that are in the Russian church, and we know that these things they're saying are not them. So. But yeah, that was today's topic, and then We'll probably record tomorrow or in the next few days, and we'll discuss some other pretty interesting facts. If you have not yet, please like, share, subscribe, become a Patreon member if you feel called to. Also, we're still accepting pre-orders for the prayer book compilation that we are doing with the blessing and guidance of our spiritual father.
And St. Anthony's Monastery.
Yep, we got the blessing from them as well. So remember, as stated before, we are not clergy. We are not members of clergy at all. Please seek spiritual guidance from your spiritual father or your priest. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to us. We're always here to talk. Any ideas for content, please let us know. And I think that we can wrap it up with that today, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sounds about like a good place to end.
Should we end with a prayer?
If you've got a prayer, go for it.
Well, yeah, we'll just do an Our Father. Is that okay?
Sounds goodly.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us.
Amen.
Amen. Doina, I know you're watching.
He did cross himself right this time.
Cross myself right all the way over. We'll talk about that on the next episode. It's a good story and a good reminder to all of us to
pay attention to the little things.
Pay attention to the little things and respect the cross. It means a lot. So God bless you guys. Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen. Cheers.